All right, so thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for coming, and sorry for all the delay. So this is actually a very, very new paper, and this is my first time ever presenting this. So I hope that you'll find there's something new there, and also I'll be very grateful for any feedback that you have. So as the title suggests, this paper is asking the question, will generative AI replace human creatives? So the idea of this paper come along actually more than a year ago. I was like reading newspapers, and I saw a news article talking about a lot of content creators, like journalists and screenwriters on Hollywood, and they went on strike. But one of the reasons why they went on strike is that they want to basically fend against generative AI. And so a lot of people are concerned that generative AI, like LLM models or diffusion models, with their rapid advancing, they will eventually replace human creatives, right? So, the project really just came out trying to answer the question, will generative AI actually fully replace human creatives? So the key insight, just in a nutshell, is the following. I want to point out, I think there's an analogy between the interaction between human and generative AI and those interactions between active and passive investors in the traditional financial market. And we know that the interaction between the second one, the active and passive investor interactions, is very well studied in finance. So that means that from finance scholars, right, if we can articulate the analogy between these two, then we can basically leverage a wide, extensive prior research on this aspect to help us understand the interaction between human and generative AI. So in a nutshell, the conclusion coming out of the paper would be that even if generative AI reaches its theoretical limit, it will not be able to completely replace humans. Okay, and also I will show that in a very, very simple model. Sometimes I found this model to be embarrassingly simple, but I will also consider some extension of the very basic model, and that will show some heterogeneous effect in terms of, like, even though generative AI would not completely replace humans, according to my theory, but it will have different implications for high versus low skill content creators. Will have different implications for niche versus popular contents, and also for tasks that are more frequent versus that come in less routine. Okay, so. Yeah, so in order to understand the key insight coming out of the paper, we first just need to have an understanding of what are the key features of generative AI. And the key feature is that generative AI they function as like sophisticated parrot, right? So for example, take an example of GPT models, which is the foundations behind the ChatGPT that this entire field got very popular. The GPT model, they really work on, like, basically so-called next word prediction. The idea is that if you give some prompt, okay, that's the previous a bunch of words, and it will basically predict what the next word will be based on some conditional probabilities. Where does this probability come from? Well, this probability comes from training from a large amount of human-created content. This is the way that GPT model works. And so that's why we see, like, when we look at media, we say like ChatGPT is really based on training on, like, for example, Wikipedia and a lot of online contents. So that means that it's really very like a sophisticated parrot, right? What a parrot does is that human talks and the parrot just listens to them, and with repeated exposure, the parrot eventually will come up with some next word. Although we believe that parrot does not completely understand what we are actually talking about. And this is actually also the case with generative AI. And so based on this, like, technological feature of generative AI models, we know that AI needs continuous human-generated content to remain up to date. And this is particularly relevant for content that may be more time-sensitive and fast-changing. For example, in the field of journalism, we know that news come in and changes day to day. right? So like if the generative AI is learned from content that has been produced, for example, a month ago, all right, it will be, without continuous human input, it will only be, the conditional probability will be based on some stale information. So it will be difficult for the generative AI to actually truly reflect what are the new things that come out. And also there's actually, just last year, there was a Nature paper come out. They actually did some experiments, and they showed that like they use AI models to generate data. And then they use the generative data as training sample to further train AI models, and then just let AI models further run. And they show that under this using this recursive structure, the AI models actually collapse pretty quickly. Like after several rounds, the AI just completely generates garbage, right? So that further indicates that AI in the model needs continuous human input to stay relevant. Okay, this is very important for the understanding of the, this is like later on a key assumption in my model will be based on this technological feature of a generative AI technology. And now let's look at the traditional financial economics, what we have learned in terms of the relationship between passive and active investors. I'll try to be a little bit quick on this because this presumably is more familiar with the audience, finance audience here. I sometimes, if I ever want to talk to an AI audience, I may actually need to spend more time on this slide. So Grossman-Stiglitz has in 1980, just almost 50 years ago, has a very famous paper on American Economic Review, and basically they argued that a perfectly efficient financial market is not possible. So in their model, they have two types of investors. These are active investors and passive investors. And the active investors, what they do is they conduct costly research into the fundamentals of an asset. And based on what they learn from their costly research, they make investment decisions, right? And the passive investors, what they do is that they do not conduct a fundamental research. But if the market price is efficient, then they will be able to learn what the active guys have already conducted. So they are free riding on the active guys and to make their investment decisions. And the Grossman-Stiglitz insight was that it's impossible for the market price to be perfectly efficient as long as the cost for conducting fundamental research is positive. The reason is that just like if the market perfectly reflects all information, in other words, assuming that the market is perfectly efficient, then no one would have incentive to actually incur the cost and acquire information. If no one has the incentive if nobody actually pays the cost to acquire information, then how could market price be efficient in the first place? That kind of creates a paradox. This is like something like financial economists should be all very familiar with. And so the equilibrium would be active and passive investors. They have to coexist, and perfect market efficiency is not possible. So if we just stare at this, and you can actually make an analogy between the relationship between AI and human, right? So as just the previous slide has indicated, that you can think about that human content creators, they look like the active investors, right? They spend all the cost to generate content. And now that similar analogy will come along, right? If the AI can produce all content very cheaply, let's say if their cost is zero, then there will be no incentive. There's no market for humans to generate content in the first place, right? Because it's just going to be strictly more costly. But if humans stop creating content, as my previous slide has demonstrated, that the AI becomes stale and becomes less useful. Right. So based on that, we know that in equilibrium, human and AI, generative AI, they must coexist. So I think this insight is pretty straightforward. Actually, I have done in one experiment is that I just provide a one-sentence prompt to ChatGPT. I said, can you tell me can you tell me the relationship, whether there's an analogy between the relationship between generative AI and human versus the Grossman and Stiglitz 1980 AER paper. Actually, ChatGPT gave me a pretty decent answer, kind of in line with what I'm showing here in this slide. So I think this insight seems to me, at least to me, is pretty natural. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is this is a very simple model. I said this is a baseline model that just formalizes the insight that that the previous two slides has talked about. And then based on this simple model, I'm going to consider 3 extensions that will shed more light on how generative AI is going to affect the labor market for human content creators. So the baseline model is very, very simple. I consider a continuum of consumers, and there's a endogenous fraction of them will consume human-generated content. And this is lambda fraction of them. And then the 1 minus lambda fraction of them, they will actually just consume AI-generated content. And human, when they create content, they incur a cost, a capital C, and the quality of the content they create presumably is relatively high, so they can bring benefit to the consumers, which I denote as R, capital R. Okay. And as I said, 1 minus a lambda fraction of the consumers, they will consume AI-generated content. And for AI to generate content, I assume that the cost of production is lowercase c, which is lower than the capital C. So it's cheaper for AI to generate content than humans. And the benefit that the AI-generated content is, I denote it as lowercase r. And this is going to be a function, increasing function of lambda, okay? So that this is what I mean here, that the benefit of AI-generated content is going to be increasing in the fraction of content that are created by human. Why this is the case? Because the human-generated content will be used to train AI models, right? When there are more human-generated content, that means that there's just a larger sample for the generative AI model to be trained upon, right? So if we don't have much human-generated content, the AI can really learn nothing. So the quality and the benefit that it can bring to consumers will be relatively low. So this is the assumption here, right? If no human is actually creating content, then the AI will only just produce no valuable information as well. Okay, if in the limit, right? So like everyone is actually consuming content, then I assume that the benefit that AI can generate is very similar to what human can create. So this assumption is not essential, but this is kind of just trying to bias against me as much as possible, because this assumption basically says I'm assuming that AI is reaching its theoretical limit in its power, right? If you give it enough sample human-generated content to train from, it can behave as well as human, okay? And in reality, at least in the current technologies, this is probably still not true. But I want to think about take a more futuristic perspective and want to bias against myself actually, I want to find a case in which AI can actually dominate. But even under this condition, we'll see that this is not really possible. So I think this is a very simple model. So for like sophisticated financial economists, you can probably already kind of just imagine what the equilibrium outcome would be. And to summarize then, there's not going to be a full AI takeover, right? Because the lambda has to be larger than 0. This is because if lambda is 0, then AI does not generate content. So there is actually incentive for people to pay for human-generated content. But there's also not going to be full human dominance, right? A generative AI will actually be adopted in equilibrium. So the unique equilibrium coming out of this will be a coexistence of a generated AI and human, and the extent into which AI is adopted is going to be pinned down by a first order condition here. Okay. So I think hopefully this is relatively straightforward. But this baseline model really just kind of formalizes the insight I've been talking about in the previous couple of slides. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to consider 3 extensions to the model so that we can think about, we can shed more light on how a generative AI is going to affect human content creation. So the first extension I'm going to think about is to look at the heterogeneous impact of generative AI on high versus low skill human content creators. So the model is going to be basically inheriting what I've been having here, except that now for humans, I consider there are 2 types of human content creators. And there's a high skill human content creators, and for them, they can incur a cost CH and to generate a content of quality relatively high, and that is the quality that they bring to consumers. The benefit they bring to consumers is going to be this RH. And there's also going to be a low-skill content creators. They can generate content at a lower cost, but the quality that they generate is a bit lower. Okay? And then consumers, I assume that the consumers, they're also heterogeneous in the sense that they have a parameter theta that captures their taste for quality. How much do they care about the quality of the content? So, like for a consumer, their payoff is going to be the theta times this R minus this C. The T here is the type that the T you can think about as index for whether it's high type or low type content. And so that is for the content creator. And the theta is the consumer's taste for how much do they value the content that is being created. Okay, and and so this is for consumers. They can choose between content created by both high skill or versus low skill humans, but they can also choose to consume content that is created by AI. Right. And the benefit that they get from generative AI is, again, I used as lower R, and is going to be a function of how much content is created by both high-skill human content creators and low-skill human content creators. And we assume that the more human content that is being created, the higher the benefits the AI can bring to humans. So this is consistent with the previous slide. And also, we assume that the high-quality content is more beneficial for the accuracy of AI-generated content. So that's why the derivative of the lambda h is higher than the derivative of lower r. I think there should be another argument like dot somewhere here. I'm messing up with my slides here. And then similar as before, if there's no human-generated content, then the AI's content value is 0. Okay, and if all the content is created by, in the limit, if every content is created by high-skilled humans, then the value that generative AI can bring is, I assume that it's going to be very similar, very close to what a high-skilled human can create. Okay. So under this assumption, then we could look at what are the possible equilibrium outcomes. So in we can compare two cases. First is that suppose we're in an economy, there's no AI at all. So that this is the status quo before, say, 2020. Okay, and in this case, there exist parameter regions in which the high type and low type of human content creators, they coexist in equilibrium. So the consumers who have low taste for quality, they are willing to go for the cheaper content created by low-skilled humans. But for other, like those consumers with high theta, right? So they are going to choose content created by high-skilled human, and so these two do coexist. And then we can see what is the impact of introducing AI on this in this case, and we can show that there exist parameter regions in which, if we introduce these introduce AI, then the low-skill human content creators, they are going to be completely eliminated. Right, so consumers, they used to consume low-quality content, they will actually just consume AI instead. However, the high-skill human content creators, they may coexist with AI, and it's actually even possible for them to earn higher profits. So the market size of consumers that are actually now willing to choose high content creators versus AI, they may actually be higher. The reason is because, well, because some of the low quality content created by human, because they are now getting out of market. So we know that in overall, the content created by human is reducing. So that AI quality actually may actually be, may now just go a bit lower and actually favor content created by high-skilled humans. Okay, so this is the first extension. And the second extension I want to understand is like what type of content is most vulnerable to AI, the introduction of AI. So I'm going to compare two types of content that I call just popular versus niche content. right? So again, this is just like building on the first extension, but now I'm just adding additional heterogeneity that there exists so-called popular and niche content. And their major difference is their market size, right? So the popular content, the market size is larger. And within each category of content, popular versus niche, there also exists their own high-skill versus low-skill content creators. And consumers can choose between these two, the content created by these two human type of creators. But they can also choose AI, and AI's quality is going to be an increasing function of all these arguments. So basically, these are just like how many, within each category, all right, how many content are created by human, either by high-skill guys versus low-skill guys. Okay, the impact of popular content on AI's quality is going to be larger because there's just more content in the first place. Okay, and also both type of human-generated content may still both are going to be useful for AI's quality. Right? Because overall, even though there's a difference between popular and niche content, the underlying, for example, language structure is shared. Right? So like if there are more niche content being created, that also helps with the quality of AI-generated popular content. Okay. So under these assumptions, we can also find a possible equilibrium outcome when we introduce AI. So for popular contents, the result here is quite similar to the previous slide, that the AI is likely to replace low-skill creators, although high-skill creators may still coexist with AI. But for niche content, we show that, again, high-skill creators will coexist with AI, but it's also possible for low-skill content creators to coexist as well. And furthermore, if we assume that there's a free entry for the content creators, human content creators, to choose between producing popular versus niche content, it's possible for the human content creators to migrate from popular contents and reallocate their effort into producing niche content. So this is also kind of another piece of implication for how the market is going to evolve. The content market is going to evolve as we introduce generative AI. All right, so the third extension is going to be a dynamic model. Okay, so far everything is static, one shot, just like Grossman-Stiglitz. But if we actually think about the interaction, because we say that like as time evolves, AI-generated content trained on previous content is going to be more likely to be stale. So there's really a time dimension in our setting, right? So the static model does not take that into consideration. So we can actually think about a dynamic model to fully flesh out these arguments. So the setup we're going to be thinking about is that suppose that what consumers really care about is the state of the world, which we denote as S, and it evolves over time. Okay, you can model however you want. In the paper right now, I assume that it just follows a Brownian motion, but I think all the insights should generalize if we allow for more general processes. And the consumers, they face decisions. They need to make decisions that rely on these state of the world, and the time when just the event in which they need to make decisions, I assume that follows some Poisson process. So like consumers do not always need to make decisions, right? But it comes from time to time with Poisson arrival. So whenever they need to make decisions, they now have two options they can choose from. Either they can choose to pay high cost for new signals generated from human. And here the assumption is that whenever human content creators try to learn the signals, there's no noise in their content creation. If I relax this assumption, then I'm going to favor human content creators more, right? Because this is, and then we use, this is one case. Another case that they can use AI trained on stale signals to help them make decisions. The trade-off here is that using AI is going to be lower cost, but the accuracy is also going to be lower if the signals were generated a long time ago. Okay, So the equilibrium coming out of this would be that costly human content creation will only come at discrete time spots, okay? Because it's just costly to produce content, so we do not want them to do it very often, okay? They do it from time to time, okay? And whenever there are between different time spots in which human generates content, the AI will fill the gaps, okay? So if we look at some comparative statics, that means that more routine decisions will rely more on AI, and more infrequent decisions, there is going to be more persistent role for humans. Okay, so just to conclude, as I said, this is still very early stage work. So this is what I have so far. And so just in conclusion, I want to argue that the generative AI, at least under the paradigm it's currently being designed, right? They cannot fully replace humans. They need to depend on fresh human inputs in order for it to stay relevant. And the analogy is very similar to that in the Grossman-Stiglitz between active and passive investors, in that the AI and human, they will coexist in equilibrium. There's more distributional effects that the low-skilled humans are most vulnerable to AI, but high-skilled labor, they may still thrive. They could potentially even earn higher profit. So that means for our researchers, maybe junior researchers will suffer, but senior researchers, they actually can thrive even more. Okay, and there's a difference between high skill and versus niche markets. So like maybe for human content creators, maybe look for niche contents that it's more difficult for AI to be trained on. And also non-routine tasks may still rely on human. Okay, so I think the broader lesson for this is that even though we are coming into an AI stage, a lot of new things is coming up, but the decades-old insight from financial economics can still prove powerful in this new area. So for all the financial economists in this room, this is good news that we still stay relevant as this new era is kicking in. Yeah, that's all I have for now, and it's a very early paper, so all comments are welcome. Yeah, thank you.